Welcome into the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast. We are here every Monday following a MotoGP race weekend, 10 a.m. Pacific time, live here on TikTok and then reposted on YouTube so you can get all the MotoGP talking points from the weekend. Just a quick reminder, this is not a recap show. We're not going to be going back through the race. That video has already been posted to my TikTok channel, so make sure you're liking, following, sharing that page, and getting all the MotoGP you can possibly imagine. This, we're going to run through a little bit of the talking points. We're going to talk about whether or not Marc Marquez is a legitimate title contender this season, now that he's won 2 races back-to-back, and why no one seems to want to actually say so out loud. We're going to also be talking about the fact that Repsol Honda has announced they are leaving, or Repsol is leaving HRC Honda. We're going to talk about the Yamaha struggles with grip, and we're going to ask one important question. What the hell has happened to the Aprilia this season? What started out as the second best bike on the grid has all but disappeared. All that and more straight ahead here on Monday Morning MotoGP. Come on, join in the fun. So let's start with Marc Marquez because, a crazy weekend in Misano with the conditions on Sunday. The sprint race, Jorge Martin kind of surprised us coming out of the gate. And then Sunday started shaping out like we kind of expected, with Pecco Bagnaia being strong, the VR46 guys being strong. And so when it started raining, we knew that was going to throw everyone for a loop. I just don't think we knew how big of a loop. Now, one thing you can always count on when it starts raining or conditions are changing is that Marc Marquez has this innate ability to get up to speed really, really quickly. He judges the conditions perfectly. He doesn't take very long to figure out how fast he can go. And then he pushes really, really hard. And we have to also understand this year that Marc Marquez isn't really fighting for a title. I don't think he thinks fighting for a title is a super realistic, or at least on his list of goals. Would he love to win a world title? Sure. But it's not on the to-do list as far as things that have to happen in order to make this season successful. I think Marc has already ticked off all of the things for his season for it to be successful. He wanted to have fun on the bike again, check. He wanted to prove he could be fast again, check. He wanted to earn a factory contract, check. He won a race, he's been on podiums, check, check. So winning a world title isn't really, that pressure isn't on top of him this season. He is relaxed. We see him much different this year than most seasons. But now he's won 2 races back-to-back, and the race in Aragon couldn't have been any different than the race in Misano. Aragon, he dominated from start to finish. He was so much better than anyone else. It didn't matter he was on a year-old Ducati versus the 2024. He just came in, showed up, kicked ass, went home, took his trophy. Thank you very much. This weekend, it was a little rougher. Crashed in qualifying, qualifies 9th, comes through in the sprint, moves forward, but wasn't really ever in podium contention. And in the main race, he wasn't really in podium contention either until it started raining. But it did start raining. And when it did, the conditions changed so quickly. And Pecco said it in the press conference. Marc was just braver than everyone else. And part of that is Marc's ability to judge the conditions. And like I said, part of that is that Marc doesn't have to feel the pressure of winning a title. So if he crashes in the rain, he tried. No big deal, no harm, no foul. He'll be back in 2 weeks in Misano to try again. Pecco crashing, handing more points to Jorge Martin would have been a disaster. But the question now needs to be asked. Marc Marquez is 53 points down from championship leader Jorge Martin, which means 53 minus 7, 46. He's only 46 points down from Pecco Bagnaia. And we just saw Pecco close back 20 points this weekend to Jorge Martin. Something like that. So you're telling me Marc Marquez can't claw back those same amount of points? Now, I'd said last weekend, or the last race weekend, that I didn't think Marc was a legit title contender because it would take mistakes from both Pecco and Jorge Martin to put him back in front. Like, both of these guys would have to collapse. If it was just one guy, shit happens in racing. We've seen it. We've seen crashes. We've seen what happened this weekend to Jorge Martin. One rider can lose a lot of points. It would be very, very difficult to see both Pecco and Jorge Martin collapse enough to let Marc win the title. But MotoGP is the gift of unpredictability that keeps on giving. And the fact that this championship keeps going back and forth, and every time one of these guys seems to grab a hold of the trophy and just put one hand on it, something happens to make them fall down. Something happens to make them lose points. Something happens, a mistake, misjudgment, something that keeps this title close at the top. And meanwhile now, you have Marc winning 2 races in a row, taking 50 points, hauling a bunch of points on Pecco Bagnaia last weekend, hauling a bunch of points on Jorge Martin this weekend. Now, in and of itself, those are just 2 weekends. Should we read too much into it? Is Marc a legit title contender? I don't really think so. I don't think we can say, oh man, he's back, he's going to win the title. This is the sort of thing that's going to happen every week. The accident with Pecco last week, kind of a freak accident with Alex Marquez. The thing this week, the decision by Jorge Martin to enter the pits and then end up 15th in that wet, dry race, that's not going to happen every single week. So I don't think we can say that these are the type of things that Marc Marquez can count on to win a title. And I do think he's still on the outside looking in. But the fact it has happened 2 weeks in a row, the championship has gotten closer. And Enea Bastianini's now only like 62 points back in 4th place. It's tight at the top. Sometimes we don't see championships this tight between the top 2 guys, let alone the top 4. So I do think it's time to say out loud and acknowledge that Marc is starting to think about the title. Marc is starting to have that voice in the back of his head going, hey, I know it's not on the to-do list, but should it be? And I think we're not going to see him have that full focus killer instinct to try to win a title until he's maybe 15, 20 points within and like right there in the battle. But I do think this is in the back of his mind chirping at him going, hey, we could win this. If a few things go our way, we're going to get weather in the flyaway races. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan. I mean, we saw what happened last year in Japan. That Repsol Honda being on the podium with Marc Marquez because the conditions were just beneficial to the way he rides, the way he can do it. It's not out of the question that he has some strong weekends here as we head off. And he's going to get a redo in Misano, a chance to qualify near the front in 2 weeks. But what's interesting to me is that it feels like the riders, no one wants to say it out loud. No one wants to wish a Marc Marquez challenge to the title this season into existence. Pecco Bagnaia doesn't want to say out loud, yeah, Marc's a contender. He's very hesitant to say those words. It's like saying Voldemort. You say it and it comes into in existence. And I don't think Pecco wants that hanging on the back of him as he's riding this motorcycle. He does not want that in the back of his mind, that Marc is a legit title contender right now. Not next year when he's his teammate at Factory Ducati. Marc's a title contender right now is a scary thing to say if you're Pecco Bagnaia or Jorge Martin. Because again, he has nothing to lose. He doesn't, Jorge said it last year. I'm not expected to win the title. That pressure's on Pecco Bagnaia, not me. Well, this year that pressure is on Jorge Martin, is on Pecco Bagnaia. It is not on Marc Marquez. This is all free space. This is free space for him to pick up wins and pick up podiums and, oh yeah, maybe just casually pick up the world title. So I think a lot of these riders are thinking, you know what, if I just don't say it, maybe it can't be a reality. Now for Marc Marquez, on his direction, where he's not really coming on saying, yeah, I'm a title contender, is about expectations. He likes to keep his expectations below the radar. He likes to play the mind games of the other guys going, I'm not really a title contender, even though I'm racing and kicking your ass. He wants to stay underneath the radar, doesn't want to set the expectations for the team and himself too high. He wants to be a realist, but then he loves when he sets those expectations low and then he elevates them and he stands on the top step of that podium. Marc Marquez loves that. Guaranteed. He has throughout his entire career. He always downplays his chances. Oh, well, maybe if everything goes right, I can ride with the top guys. Well, we have some problems we have to figure out. I don't think it's realistic. A top 6 would be a great finish. Then he goes through and wins the race and goes, oh, hey, I'm just that good. So I do think it's time that we, the public, acknowledge that although it is an outside chance, it's not outside the realm of possibility that Marc Marquez gets himself into the title fight and is there in the last few races to see if he can't win another one. I would love to see this thing go down to 3 or 4 riders. I would love Enea Bastianini to find some consistency and drag some points back on these top guys and take this title fight to Valencia with 3 or 4 riders that could all win it. That would be interesting. That would be an exciting last round of MotoGP this season. And the season has been kind of crazy already, so why wouldn't they give us that? Come on, do us the favor. Give us a little mayhem for the end of the season. So elsewhere in the MotoGP paddock, Yamaha had a pretty good weekend at Misano. And before everyone who's a Yamaha fan gets really, really excited, there's a few reasons they had a strong weekend at Misano. They've tested there. They were very, very prepared. They basically had their bike already set up for Misano. They knew what they had going in. They had tested all sorts of new parts at this track not too long ago. They're testing again as we speak. Actually, I think that's probably over this morning already. But and we're not going to talk about the Misano test here. We'll talk about that in a future episode or future TikTok posts. So there was a few reasons why Yamaha was stronger here, and not just suddenly the bike is faster or suddenly the bike has been fixed. You know what I'm saying? So let's go through the other reason why Misano was a strong circuit, and it kind of highlights the underlying problem to Yamaha right now, is that the grip level at Misano was very, very high. Every motorcycle team, everyone was saying, hey, the grip here is really, really good. And so we can really push. We can set these bikes up to really, really push. And everyone was able to do it. And we all know, or at least we should know at this point, is that what the Yamaha does is struggle with grip. That's why they are nowhere in places like Aragon, a couple weeks ago, where Marc Marquez was very good in those slippery conditions. The Yamaha can't find any cornering speed. They can't find any acceleration. They can't find any drive. All of Fabio Quartararo's time has to be made up on the brakes. He just has no feeling, no grip on the front, no rear end grip. They just can't get the power to the ground. And that's been Yamaha's problem for quite a long time. I mean, if you think about it, Rossi and Viñales years ago were complaining to Yamaha about the lack of rear grip to make them competitive. Years ago, we're talking 2016, 2017, the CEO, the director of the Yamaha MotoGP operation came out and made a formal apology to their race riders that they hadn't done a good job and gotten them a good bike. So this is not a new complaint for Yamaha. It's not like, oh, suddenly they don't have any rear feel or rear grip, and what are they going to do about it? This has been a persistent problem over the course of the development for almost a decade now. and they still haven't been able to figure it out. Now, yes, Yamaha lacks a little bit of top speed. They're still running the inline 4 rather than the V4, so they lack a little bit of horsepower. They're a little behind in the aero. I think both of the Japanese manufacturers are. COVID really did take the piss out of the Japanese manufacturers. They put them really on the back burner. They weren't allowed to leave Japan and go to Europe and test and develop. Japan was massively shut down during COVID, so they were on the back foot for a long time. But I do think their big problem still is grip. Because when they have it, like they had it this weekend, at a track where the grip was just a little bit better, well, now they're back to running the mid-pack, not at the back of the pack. Fabio Quartararo finishes 7th in that race in the wet. That's how much grip was out there for him. He moves forward in the sprint as well. He qualifies in the top 10. He makes it through to Q2 this week. This is not things we've been seeing from Yamaha. So it does feel like they have a very specific mission statement right now, is to get the power to that motorcycle to the ground, eliminate wheel spin, get back to cornering very, very fast, get the front end feeling back, get the qualifying feeling back. Because even in the years where Yamaha wasn't the fastest bike on the grid and everyone would make fun of how slow the Yamaha was, it was a donkey, it's a nothing bike. That bike could still qualify because it had corner speed. Because when no one's in your way in the corners, you could run really fast lap times. If you were leading a race, you could run really fast lap times. As Fabio Quartararo said, we can't overtake anybody because you can't run fast corner speed when there's another bike sitting in the corner. And then you get blitzed down the straight by the massive Ducati horsepower, KTM. Not even a fair fight at that point. So Yamaha knows what they need to work on, but it brings me to a question. Who would you rather be? Would you rather be Yamaha, who kind of knows what their biggest problems? I'm not saying this is their only problem. They're still down on horsepower. They're still down on top speed. I don't think they figured out aero as well as the other manufacturers, but it does feel like this grip is their biggest problem and most consistent problem. But they know that. They know the problem that needs to be fixed. Now, on the other side, you have Honda, which doesn't seem like they really know what problem they need to fix. Alberto Puig basically said, oh, what's wrong? The bike. That's what's wrong. When asked, what's the one thing you're looking for to fix, he said, the bike. They aren't as sure what exactly their problem is. It's kind of everything. So what's better? Knowing the problem you need to fix, having a specific focus, but having that have been your focus for almost a decade and you're still banging your head against the wall. Like, they know the problem, but it has been a long time since they've been able to fix it. So is that better? Or is being at the Honda, throw all the spaghetti at the wall and see where you get to go forward, actually a better problem to have? I actually don't know. I do think Yamaha is a little ahead of Honda. Maybe it's just because they have Fabio Quartararo on the bike and he's making things look not so bad. Alex Rin's a very talented rider, a race winner. He won a race on a Honda. It doesn't look like he's going to be winning a race on the Yamaha as things are standing now, unless something really wacky happens. So maybe it's a difference in riders and not much difference in machinery, but it does seem like the Yamaha is coming out on top more weekends than not when it comes to the Yamaha Honda Cup this year, the Japanese Cup in MotoGP. So I think you'd have to give the edge to Yamaha, but it is still frustrating to deal with the same problem year after year after year after year and still have no real solution coming back. Now, they are working on it. They are testing again today on Monday. So is Honda, hopefully, if they get their riders out of sickbed. But sometimes you almost want to be the team that can go, well, anything we try might work. Oh man, if we get a few more horsepower, that'd be great. If we improve the corner speed, that'd be great. If we improve rear grip, if we just improve something, it's almost like the more that's wrong, the more chances you have to fix something. Whereas Yamaha is really needing to focus on this one problem, and the solution has eluded them for quite a while. So again, before we get too excited that Yamaha top 7, Fabio Quartararo saying he's had fun on the bike this weekend for the first time in a very long time, I think they're still a long way out. I would love to see them back at the front very soon. I'm a Yamaha man through and through from the very beginning, and it's been tough to watch, and hopefully they're headed in the right direction, but I do think it is going to be a very long road. But there was a little light this weekend, so let's take it where we can get it. All right, I want to talk about Jorge Martin and the holes in his game as a motorcycle rider. There is no doubt Jorge Martin is one of the fastest riders on the grid. I mean, this guy kind of came through the field when it came to, I think he won the Moto3 title, spent a couple years in Moto2. Everyone was like, dude, he's too fast to be just languishing in Moto2, waiting for him to win a title. Like, screw that, let's get this guy to MotoGP. He was fast very, very quickly in MotoGP. He is talented, fearless, tenacious. He's aggressive. He's a great motorcycle rider. I mean, maybe one of the most talented riders on the grid. And I don't think I've always given Jorge Martin enough credit with how talented he is on the bike. He's a very good rider, very fast, always at the front. He gets up to speed so quickly. And one of those reasons he gets up to speed so quickly, we watch Pecco kind of build throughout the weekend. Pecco starts here, and on Friday, he's here, and on Saturday, he's here, and on Sunday, he's at the top. And that's because Pecco's a very technical rider. He really digs into what's going on the bike. He wants the bike to be set up for perfectly so that when he rides it on Sunday, it's not a difficult race. He doesn't have to wrangle the bike. The bike has been suited to the conditions, to him, to the track, and that's where they can exist together, right? Whereas Jorge Martin just kind of has a base setting. They go into a racetrack, and then he figures out how to ride that base setting very fast with minimal tweakage. They tweak, they change the setup, they try things, as the riders always like to say. But he's not relying on the technical data to really analyze and figure out exactly where the bike needs to change to make him better. He's just going to make himself better over the weekend, get more used to the track, push harder in different places, and just be a really good rider on a very good bike. And it's why we see him right out the gate on Friday be one of the fastest riders on the track. It's just why we see it. It happens. But the hole in Jorge Martin's game, oh boy, it's the mental side. It's the decision-making side. It's the strategy side. And it's the technical side is where Pecco has him covered. And I think that is the reason he's finding it so difficult to pull out a lead on Pecco Bagnaia, to win a world title on the same bike. Because all riders have bad luck. All riders have things that happen that they would rather not happen. So you can't say, oh, well, Jorge Martin is just, he hasn't won a title because he's just had bad luck. Pecco's had bad luck. Fabio Quartararo had bad luck when he won a title. Joan Mir only won one race that entire season. He won the title. All the riders, shit happens. It's MotoGP. So you have to kind of factor that in. Like, weirdly, we have to look at the whole season and we have to understand that not every race weekend is going to go the way we want it to. And sometimes there's a certain percentage, there's a variable that is out of our control. And that has to go into the math equation. When Pecco Bagnaia is thinking about a world title, he can't have one mistake and go, oh, well, there's my world title, there it is. He can't have another rider wipe him out and go, well, there it is. That one thing ruined my whole season. He knows that those things will happen during the course of a season. And you have to play everything else smart in order to make up for that, because it's going to happen to everybody. We've seen Bezzecchi being wiped out while trying to compete for a title last year. We've seen Pecco this year in the crash with Alex Marquez, that freak accident. We see that happen to riders. There's nothing they can do about it, but that's factored into, okay, in the equation of how to win a world title, that's just a part of the piece. You have, super fast rider, great bike, great team, bad luck, good luck. Sometimes things will go your way. But a major factor in that equation is your ability to make decisions quickly and make the right decision, whether that's tires, whether that's going out. We saw Marc Marquez at Aragon sit out the wet session saying he didn't want any part of it. There was no reason to ruin the feeling he had on the bike in the dry. The race was going to be in the dry. No reason to go out there in the wet. That's a race decision. We saw Marc Marquez this weekend say it in the media day. Hey, why didn't I pit with Jorge Martin? I just follow the local guys. I'm just going to follow the Italians that know this racetrack, that race here all the time, that have seen every single condition that this racetrack can throw at them. If those guys are staying out, I'm staying out. Those are the decisions we talk about. I mentioned tire choice, we mentioned setup and electronics, and looking at the data and what are these guys doing on and off the track to make it able for them to compete in a MotoGP weekend. And Jorge Martin's decision making is usually the thing that gets him. Yes, he'll make a mistake and crash. Yes, he can get a little hot under the collar. He seems like he's reined that stuff in. We haven't seen a ton of flat-out mistakes from Jorge Martin. We haven't seen a ton of losing his head and not understanding where he needs to be. He feels like he's matured in that direction. Well, now he needs to get the decision-making part of his game dialed in, because he should have been able to read the room just by where all the other riders on the track were at that point in the race on Sunday. No one was heading toward the pit when he did. They were all hugging that far right side of the track. They couldn't have been further from pit lane than, if they tried. They couldn't have been. Yet, Jorge kind of peels in, looking ahead of him, and he sees Pecco is staying out. And unless in his mind he was like, this is a genius master stroke, I'm going to get on the wet bike first, Pecco has made a massive mistake, and I'm getting in. That had to have been what was going through his mind, is that, well, Pecco not going in is a huge mistake. It's going to keep raining. I'm going to get on the wet bike first. I'm going to take this advantage and all that stuff. It didn't work out that way. But Marc Marquez was able to kind of read the room and go, well, worst case scenario, I'm out here in the same conditions everyone else is on. And we're all going to be going slowly. And then if we do one more lap and it's still raining like this, yeah, I got to get in the pit, get the wet bike. But then I'm still with this group. And now I'm going to rely on my skills to win the race for me. I don't have to strategize myself into the win. And I think that's what happens to Jorge Martin sometimes. He outsmarts himself with his strategy. And I'll give you an example. Last season at Australia, in Phillip Island, Jorge Martin was very, very, very fast. I think he was the fastest rider on the track in basically every session. He was incredible all weekend long. And I had said, I think in a video and maybe this podcast, that Jorge Martin didn't really have to worry about any strategy. He was just so much faster than everyone else. But on Sunday, he takes a gamble with a soft tire, a tire that most riders thought wouldn't last the race. And his strategy of that race was to get to the front, put in a massive gap, and then when the tires dropped, he would have such a massive lead it wouldn't really matter. But that doesn't make sense. Why are you strategizing when you're just better? It doesn't make sense to me that you're taking a look at the data and going, look at this. I am so much faster on equal footing than everyone else. But I'm going to roll the dice with a gambling move to try to get that extra little advantage. Why are you trying to squeeze the juice out of that dry lemon when the juice out of the normal lemon is already in the cup and you already have so much more, and you're wasting time squeezing every last bit of that lemon out? It's not worth it. It's diminishing returns. You're talented enough to ride up there without making the odd call, without making the unique call that might pay off, that has a chance of paying off. But if it doesn't pay off, it's called a gamble for a reason. It's called gambling for a reason. It's not because you are going to be better. It's because it gives you a chance for something to go your way. But that chance comes with a risk. And I sometimes feel that Jorge Martin is risking the sure thing for the long shot, if that makes sense. And maybe during the race, the conditions were really bad. We could tell he put his hand up on that lap saying, oh, this sucks, I'm coming in. Maybe they were too bad and he just didn't have the confidence to even stay on two wheels at the speed they were going. And so he felt going in was the only move he could make. But it doesn't make that much sense when you're fighting for a title, you're 23 points ahead. Pecco Bagnaia is right ahead of you. Yes, it's raining, but he's dealing with conditions, you're dealing with the conditions. Ride around behind the guy for another lap. Even if you lose a handful of positions and then have to pit for the wet bike, well, you're still in the fight. You're still there. But taking this gamble and being the only guy to do something different doesn't seem like strategy. It seems like you're trying to throw it away. It seems like you're making a decision against all of the data rather than taking the data into examination and taking it into consideration and then going, actually, the smartest thing we could do here is nothing. The smartest thing we could do is just not ruffle the status quo. Let's just stay here and bide our time. I hate that term, but in this situation, that's kind of what they needed to do. In Australia, too, I was so surprised that he was already faster than everyone. He didn't need to seek out an additional advantage. And in trying to seek out that additional advantage, he ends up screwing himself. It costs him a win, costs him a podium. And I think it's very similar type of decision, very different circumstances in Misano this weekend, but it's the same type of decision we saw this weekend. He was seeking out that advantage, that extra advantage, to try to get some more points, to try to do the smart thing. And it wasn't the smart thing. And we all make mistakes. But I think I say all of this just to kind of emphasize that this is the thing Jorge Martin needs to examine within himself. He needs to understand when to take those risks and when to just go, you know what? I'm going to trust myself just to be better than you. I'm going to trust myself that if I'm in the fight, then I'm in the fight. And to not take myself out of the fight because I'm trying something a little out of the ordinary. Marc Marquez has this dialed in more than anyone. Dialed freaking in. Was he comfortable on that track? Did he know what was going on with the conditions? Did he know if it was going to rain harder or if it was going to stop? No. But he goes, you know who might know? The Italian riders who spend basically every weekend at this track have seen it rain, have seen it shine, have seen it wind, have seen it everything here. Maybe those guys know something I don't. And worst case scenario, I'm pretty good in these slippery conditions. We do one more lap in the pouring rain, everyone's going to go in anyway. And I'll still be part of this group. And then I'll be on my wet tires, and then I'll be correct, and then we can push, and then we can fight. And he was going to live to fight. If that would have happened, if they would have all pitted the next lap, yeah, Jorge Martin would have made the correct decision. But it wouldn't have been that much better. I mean, he would have won the race, and Pecco would have gotten second or third. So Pecco's risk in that situation was a 5-10 point risk, where Jorge Martin's risk in that was almost a 25 point risk. And it wasn't worth it, and it didn't pay off. But luckily for us, it means the championship is closer than ever. All right, I saw someone mention in the chat Repsol Honda, but that is one of the talking points we wanted to cover today. I don't have a lot to say about it, but if you haven't seen the news, Repsol has announced they are ending their 30-year relationship with HRC, and they will no longer be the title sponsor for that Honda factory team, which is wild to think that we're not going to see that bike on the grid next year. We are not going to see the Repsol colors on the motorcycle. Pretty wild, actually. And it's not a little thing when your title sponsor decides, nah, I'm out. I mean, look what happened to the Petronas Yamaha team. Petronas pulls out of that Yamaha satellite team, and that team kind of falls apart. They were kind of self-financed for a year, and they owed everyone money, and then they have to sell the Trackhouse, and now they're Trackhouse Aprilia. Like, Petronas pulling out of that Yamaha team was a huge reason that team collapsed. Now, we're not talking about a satellite Yamaha team here. We're talking about factory Honda. We're talking about HRC Honda here. So I don't think they just fold it up and go home. They can afford, if Trackhouse Racing can afford to ride an entire season without a title sponsor, you can believe that Honda Motor Corporation can afford to run a MotoGP season without a title sponsor. They wouldn't prefer it, but it is possible. So I don't think this is the end of the world for HRC, and I do think they knew it had been coming. They haven't had the results. I mean, 2019-20 was great, was the best year on record. 2020, rough season, not competitive. 2021, a couple wins, not competitive. And the last year and a half in MotoGP have been almost what you would call embarrassing if you're on a sponsor side. If you're Repsol going, well, this isn't what we pay our sponsorship fees for. This is what we pay money for, to ride around in the back and to be called slow and to kind of be the laughing stock of the paddock. What, like, no, thank you. So it is an interesting move just because it's a big move, but it's a little bit inevitable, and I think we were going to see this happen. Will they be back in MotoGP? Who knows? It feels like a long shot for them to leave and come back quickly. Will they look for other teams to sponsor? Trackhouse is looking for a title sponsor, but I don't see that happening right now. I also don't really know what this means for Honda going forward. Can they find a massive title sponsor for next season? I think they'll find something. They won't get their premium fees they get when you have Marc Marquez riding on the back of the bike, and the type of sponsorship deal you can have when you have a top tier rider and is riding at the front and winning championships. But I don't think this spells the end for HRC. It just spells the end for a very long and storied relationship between these two. And I do think we saw a little bit of this writing on the wall, you say, when Honda did its one-off livery for Silverstone. A lot of the other teams, if you notice, especially the factory Ducati team, really was beholden to their sponsors to not make the retro livery take over and replace the sponsorship on the bike. I mean, Lenovo was still all over that bike. And we saw it with some of the other teams as well. And with Honda, the Repsol really was playing second fiddle to the Honda on their retro livery. It was a very traditional Honda retro livery. And it was signaling a little bit like, we're not as worried about keeping these sponsors happy because A, we're already riding around at the back. We're not going to get that much TV time, and they didn't. And B, these sponsors are already looking for the door, so we might as well just throw it into our livery and do something cool and maybe make a headline that way, get our Honda brand out there, and not worry too much about making the sponsors really happy like the factory Ducati team. And, I mean, it worked as far as that goes. Like, the Honda retro livery was far and away better, more classic, more cool than the Ducati livery that was covered with all of the sponsors from the modern day and basically just looked like the same exact bike, which with like a white stripe on it. So I think we knew this was coming. We saw the writing on the wall. It is, change is interesting and not probably a place where HRC wants to see themselves. They've already said they're committed to MotoGP. They're committed to get to the, getting back to the front. So I don't see this sticking a fork in their efforts, but it does, damage the pocketbook a little bit because whoever they get to come in to replace Repsol is not going to be paying top dollar sponsorship. It's going to be rough going for them. And we'll see what that bike looks like. It is exciting now a little bit because we're going to see a very different Honda next year. We're not going to have that bright orange bike you can see from space. It's going to be something a little different. So we'll have to see what exactly that is and if it's a self-titled team or they can quickly put a sponsorship deal together, which is going to be difficult. We heard Marc Marquez talk earlier in the year. A lot of these companies have to put their budgets for next year together, in the middle of this year. They have to let the marketing department know, hey, here's where we're going to spend money. Here's where we're going to spend this money. Here's where we're not going to spend money. And so the fact that this is happening and this announcement is coming now, where can Honda go where a company could say, actually, we still have money left in our marketing budget for next season to sponsor a MotoGP team? Because we're not talking about $25 a week. Like, this isn't like sponsoring the Horsepower Rodeo podcast where you can send me a free t-shirt and I'll mention your name on the podcast. They don't do that. I've never actually done that, but hey, I'd do that if you send me a free shirt. This is a little different. This is the big boys. This is real money. So we'll have to see if there's any companies out there that can look at Honda and go, actually, that's worth investing in now for the long term. Maybe I can get in on the ground floor while this is still in the development stage. And then, hell, the regs change 2027. They put a good bike on the grid. And then our colors are flying at the front for a discount. That has to be the pitch. But we'll see where it goes. So the last thing I want to talk about, and this is me being a little petty, because at the beginning of the season, I was roasted by people in MotoGP forums, TikTok, wherever you want to talk about it, when I said that Fabio Quartararo going to Aprilia was not some magic bullet to win a world title. Everyone on the internet, all they could say week in and week out was, oh, Fabio Quartararo should just sign with Aprilia so that he can win a world title next year. Oh, he should just sign with Aprilia already. Aprilia will fix all of Fabio Quartararo's problems in the world. Aprilia, Aprilia, Aprilia. And I said I don't think Aprilia is a championship-winning motorcycle yet. I think the wisdom coming into this season was that it was the second best bike on the grid, behind the Ducati. Probably the third best bike because we have the 2024 Ducati and the 2023 Ducati, and then we had the Aprilia. And we saw Maverick Vinales do amazing things at places like Coda. We saw Aleix Espargaro strong this year. He's been on podiums. He's been on sprint podiums. They've been strong at times. But I'm going to say this again. For the people in the back, Aprilia's not ready. They do not have a competitive motorcycle week in and week out to fight for a world title. They just do not have that yet. And I know what you're going to say. I've heard it all. Oh, well, they just don't have the riders. They don't have the top tier caliber riders. They don't have the Jorge Martins and the Pecco Bagnaiyas and the this and the that. I get it. I get that's what you think. And that is true. But you know who does have a top tier rider? Factory Yamaha. They have who I think is one of the best riders on the grid. And right now for them, 7th place is a victory. Because the bike isn't up to speed. The Aprilia is not good everywhere. The Aprilia is good at tracks it's good at, and it is nowhere everywhere else. Like, riders or not, let's look at what they did this last Sunday. I'm going to go to the data. The top Aprilia, Miguel Oliveira in 11th. Your top Aprilia is the satellite team of Trackhouse Racing and Miguel Oliveira. Vinales 16th, Raul Fernandez 18th, Aleix Espargaro DNF. Now we can say it's the riders because they're not winning races. But when you're finishing 11th, 16th, 18th, and DNF, it's more than the riders. They are headed the wrong direction with the motorcycle. That is not a championship-winning motorcycle this year. I don't care who's riding that bike this year. They could get a win or two. They can be good at tracks they're good at. Those high agility, the Silverstone tracks, Assen, places like that, they can be competitive. But for the most part, that motorcycle is nowhere. And I'm going to stick by that through the end of the year. It's not a championship winning bike. I'm sorry, it's just not. If you want to win a title, you have to be top 6 nearly every single week. Because like we said earlier, mistakes happen. Fluke accidents happen. You're going to DNF. You're going to have a run-in with a Marquez. You're going to lose points through no fault of your own. So when those things aren't happening to you, when you're not having the freak accidents, you have to be finishing in the top 6 every single week and getting points. That's how you win a title. That is how Joan Mir won a title on Suzuki. He stayed out of trouble. He was in the top 6 every single week. You win one race, boom, you win a title. But you can't be finishing 16th during a weekend where you didn't have a freak accident. You didn't have a run-in with another rider. No one collected you at the start. No one got in your way and ran you off a line and pushed you into the gravel. You can't have weekends that should be okay and okay be 15th. Okay be outside the points. Okay has to be 6th. And Aprilia hasn't shown that they can bring a bike to every track that can put them in the conversation to be 6th. Now, they still have races this season to prove me wrong, but I said it from the very beginning of the year. That bike is not ready to win a title, no matter who's riding it. I don't care. I don't care who's riding it. They're not going to win a title until they fix some problems they have. That bike is good at some tracks and not good at others. The Ducati comes out of the box and is good everywhere. I think we could have said the same thing at KTM before they kind of went the wrong direction in the middle of the season. It felt like Pedro Acosta and even Brad Binder were hovering around that top 6 at every single track. And now look, they're back hovering around that top 6. Yes, they can make mistakes. Yes, we can see Pedro Acosta getting the ring whip ripped off the front of his motorcycle by Franco Morbidelli, but it's because he's running at the front with them. And so I don't think it's just a rider factor over there. Like, look at the season. They have riders that can win where they can win. They have riders that can compete during the front. They're just not at the front enough. And I don't think it's going to be as easy as everyone thinks it is for Jorge Martin and Marco Bezzecchi to go over there and win races as factory Aprilia riders. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think what we'll see next year is that Aprilia is good at tracks they're good at and mid-pack at tracks they're not. And that's not how you win a title. You can't win a title by finishing 10th. You just can't. I see in the chat someone says you could have said something about the same thing about KTM till Pedro showed up. Brad Binder was winning races before Pedro showed up. Brad Binder goes from 15th to 1st in sprints because that bike was a rocket ship out of the starting gate. But also, I don't think anyone was basically saying KTM had a championship-worthy bike the way that people are saying, oh, Aprilia, second best bike on the grid. Aprilia. Oh, man, Fabio Quartararo just goes to Aprilia. I don't think anyone was saying that about KTM, going, oh, man, if Fabio Quartararo just signed a contract with Aprilia, he'd win a championship. And I'm not coming after everyone who's an Aprilia fan and everyone who thinks that they have a good bike, but it was just this foregone conclusion that everyone had that, oh, well, I mean, just Aprilia is the answer to any rider who wants to win a title's dreams. It hasn't been yet. They haven't proved anything. And I think that's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for them to really prove it to me that they have a bike that can turn up everywhere and just be consistent. If it's a top 10 bike, if you've got a top 10 rider, if you've got Aleix Espargaro and you say, you know what, the ceiling for this rider is this, bare minimum, they should be showing up every week and being in the top 8, top 6 and going, hey, that's just what we can do. But the fact that they win nowhere, win nowhere, win less than nowhere, and haven't even had that many wins, I think it's a problem with the bike. And they have to figure out how to get more Ducati out of that bike because it's just not strong enough everywhere. The race in Austin this year was one of my favorite races all season long. Watching Maverick storm through the pack, the way that he had corner speed, the way that he even had top speed in that race. I mean, that was so much fun to watch. I want the Aprilia to be there. I want the other manufacturers to be at the front. But I don't think it's going to be an easy time for Jorge Martin. I still am standing by this, that this season is the best chance for Jorge Martin to win a world title in MotoGP. Because it's going to be a lot tougher. A lot tougher. You look, say what you want about Aleix Espargaro, Maverick Viñales, Miguel Oliveira. They're all race winners. They've won races in MotoGP. Miguel Oliveira won races for satellite KTM team. Is nowhere on the Aprilia. So, again, could be bike gelling, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I think once Aprilia brings a bike that can compete every single week, then we can talk about it being the solution for a rider's title contending dreams. But what we've watched pan out this season, it's just not true. They're having a rough time. And even their engineers and their team boss have had to admit that they're going the wrong direction. And Maverick Viñales is all but given up. Not surprising. Aleix Espargaro's retiring. I get it. I get these things are all a factor. But it's going to be tough over there. And I think Jorge Martin's job going into Aprilia next season is just to make sure that they're in the top 6 every week. Will that be enough? We shall see. So thank you everyone for joining me on Monday morning MotoGP. Again, we are here 10 a.m. Pacific time on Mondays after a MotoGP race weekend. And then if you miss us live here on TikTok, we are reposting this on YouTube with all the little graphics and little bubbles and all the stuff all over it. So if you haven't checked it out there, go over to YouTube and subscribe. Like, follow, share, mash the buttons here to follow along and get all the MotoGP content. We're doing a bunch of stuff, got track day things coming up, and yeah, tons of stuff. So come on, follow along, and thank you so much for joining me.